Hello everybody, welcome back to the post-processing studio. This particular lesson doesn't have an accompanying in-camera portion because we actually shot star trails while we were at the Church of the Good Shepherd. While we were there, I actually had two cameras set up next to the church, one vertical, one horizontal to capture the Milky Way. I went with a vertical one because it showed the entire Milky Way, and that's the one we worked on in post-processing. But truth be told, there was a third camera. We set up that third camera, and it was a disaster. Not just because of the weather, there were mixed variable clouds, there were people shining the light, doing selfies, and I could only do my best to protect 2 out of the 3 cameras, so we weren't able to come away with a lesson or enough files to teach a lesson on star trails. But the good news is I've shot at the Church of the Good Shepherd many times over the years, and I have some great examples of star trails. So this lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you guys how to put your star trails together, how to stack your star trails, how to do that in a consistent line, or how to create the comet star trails that I'm very well known for using. We're going to examine different ways to do that, and then what we're going to do is composite a whole scene together. We're going to use the same technique of shooting over the course of the night, using a blue hour shot with all the settings, a very low ISO, a very good aperture, and a very good shutter speed to make sure it's noise-free. So we're basically going to take that night sky image, blend all the star trails together, and then composite it in with a really nice blue hour scene. So let's get started. So here's what we got inside of Capture One. Now it's interesting because this is really what I would have liked to have, and I'm just going to reset this back for us here. This is what I would have liked to have. Now, every time we go to the Church of the Good Shepherd, everything changes, new things are planted, new signs are put up, but basically, this was the third camera position, something like this that was pointed up, so we get the stars around the church. So what I've provided here, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this as a base layer. We're going to clean it up, do some compositing stuff around, get rid of all these people that are around here, these posts and everything, and then we're actually going to use the night sky. So here's the night sky by itself. You can see the Milky Way starting to come into frame. This is a different part of the year when the Milky Way is much easier to see in the visible sky. And then if I roll through these, you can see that I've shot consecutive 30-second exposures. And for this demonstration, I actually have 100 exposures that we're going to use to blend into this blue hour base. But before we get started with that, before we do any exporting, let's go inside of Photoshop, and I want to show you guys 2 different things. So this is basically our base. This is going to be our base layer, base blue hour, and then what we have is 2 options. I'm going to show you guys how to put both of these together. This is what 100 stars stacked together looks like. So this is the star trail result of 100 stars in the sky. You can see that it is just full of stars, dark sky reserve, looks amazing. Here's the type of stars that I like to create. I call them tail fades or star comets. And you can see that's just, we have a 0% opacity all the way to 100% opacity, makes these look like they're falling stars. So the first thing I want to show you guys how to do is how to create those star trail layers. Let's say you've shot 50, 100, 150, 500, what have you. The process is loading those as a stack. So if I go up here to File, I'm going to go under Scripts, and I'm going to select Load Files into Stack. And what I'm going to do is navigate into my stars here, which are here. I have 100 star layers, and I'm not going to bring all 100 in. If I bring all 100 in, and bear in mind these are just JPEGs right now, I didn't use TIFF files because I'm running off of a laptop, all of these together in my PSB, that's the large format Photoshop document, all of these 100 layers together, it's 12 gigs. Let's start with 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 consecutives, and let's open that up. It's going to load them all here. I'm not going to do any kind of alignment, and I'm going to just click OK and let Photoshop import them in. All right, now that they're all imported, if I select every one of these star layers, change the blending mode to light. Now I have star trails. Pretty simple so far. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Here's where it gets really fun. If I turn these on and off, you can see that I have a tail here on the bottom, and then I have the top is the tail here on the top. So basically, if I wanted to create a fade, so if I wanted to create a comet, all I do is take the top one, leave it at 100%, and then I do 10% down each time, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, and 10. And now you can see that I have comets. So it's as simple as that. You basically change the opacity in a linear fashion. Now right now my comets are going across the frame towards the bottom right. If I wanted them to shoot up across the sky, all I would do is reverse this. Now I just did this with 10, right? But what if I did it with 100? Well, then it wouldn't be 100, 90, 80, 70, and so on. It would be 100, 99, 98, 97, 96, 95, 94. And believe it or not, I go through and do that manually. And if you go through each layer here and you type in the value, say 76, it'll turn it to 76 opacity. 0 is back to 100. So if you have 200 star layers, then you do 2 layers, 100, 100, 99, 99, 98, 98, 97, 97, 96, 96. It takes a while. I'm sure there's a script out there that does it. I haven't found a good one. There are scripts that will do your star stacking for you, but I never get the tail fades to look right. Basically, I always like to do this manually. This is with 10 stars here. I'm going to go ahead and close that, or I'll leave it open for a second. Here's what 100 stars look like, and here's what 100 stars look like faded. So you can see that difference. In this case, I would have liked to use 200 because then it would have wrapped around the entire sky. So what you basically do, once you have this done, you just take everything and you can either flatten it or you can just save it. And you just do Command-Shift-S and you can save it as a TIFF file, scroll down to TIFF, and save it without layers as a copy, and we basically save a flattened version of this. So I'll go ahead and close this. I've already saved 2 flattened versions that I'm including for you guys, so you can pick if you want the stars with no fade or the stars with the tail fade. For this one today, I'm going to use the tail fade because that's the one I really prefer. So let's go ahead and head back into Capture One, and we'll go ahead and talk about our base layers and our stars. So here we go. First things first. First thing I want to do is just go ahead and warm this up a little bit. So let's bring this up a little bit. Let's do, I think that about 9200 or right around there should be fine. Sometimes it's easier to just type this in, so I'll say 9200, and we'll probably have a shift. I think 10 is going to look pretty good, shifted a little bit towards the magenta. So I'm just warming this up a little bit so that I can bring these greens out. If you warm up the white balance, it pulls the blue out of the rocks, adds a little bit more warmth to the green, to the yellows, to everything here. So that's going to look a little bit better. Next thing I need to do is I need to pull the exposure down a little bit because it's a little bit too bright. Remember, this is supposed to be nighttime. So I'm going to start with a darker base and then kind of lighten up certain areas in post and in Photoshop. So let's just go ahead and bring it down about a half exposure here, something just like that. And I think that's going to work out really well. Let's go ahead and export this in. So we'll export as a variant, export one variant. At this point, you guys have done so much processing with me. I'm hoping that this one is pretty intuitive as well. I'm not going to bring this in yet. I'm going to close the bouncing beach ball. I'm going to select this here, copy it, and we'll bring it into the original. I already have this ready to save. We have the original raw there. I'm going to go ahead and bring this on top here. So we'll call this adjusted raw. And actually I had the wrong one in there, but we'll go ahead and replace it afterwards. Not that big of a deal. And I'll just go ahead and save just to keep this going. So the first thing that we want to do, let's go ahead and do some cleanup. So before I do anything else, I just want to go into this image and I want to clean it up. So before we even address the stars, let's just go ahead and do some corrective surgery on this image. And the first thing that I want to do, let's go ahead and create a new layer here. I want to go ahead and blend out. I have no idea what happened here. I think these are people with torches or lights, basically. I just want to get rid of all that here. It's just so distracting having all this little stuff here. I'm also not sure what's going on with these little white spots. I want to say that's trash maybe, but all of these little things I just find very distracting. And unfortunately, this is a very busy location, so we end up with trash. This is about a year ago. Well, actually, when we filmed this project was a few months ago from when we're filming this post-processing. So by the time you watch it, this might be quite some time ago at the Church of the Good Shepherd. So I just remember it was busy those few days. It was close to a new moon, so there were a lot of people around. And you can see here there's some cars. This stuff's really easy to get rid of. I always try to clone cars out, anything like that that somebody might notice. And again, this is screen resolution. I don't think anybody really cares, but when you start getting into printing this kind of stuff, I'd really recommend taking the time to do it. Do it now, especially before you start layering things in, using luminosity masks, because once you use a luminosity mask, and you clone out an object, it's still going to account for that luminosity mask that was there. all those images are going to count inside of that luminosity mask. So it's better, good practice, just to get rid of things right away. Things that we don't really need to be there. Let's go ahead and now let's get rid of this post. Also, a side effect of getting rid of this post is limiting what the eye sees as distortion. So this is pretty easy to get rid of. Pretty easy stuff compared to some of the other stuff that we did. In the last church shot, that post was much more difficult than these. So again, I'll just clean this up, clean it up. So easy with a brush. There we go. Never dull, never boring. The life of a landscape photographer. Always something to paint out. Always something that you wish was different, a little better. Part of the job. All right, so we'll basically just go to clean this up. Now again, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect because nobody will really know what's supposed to be there and what's not supposed to be there. So it's pretty easy here. Let's just do some final cleanup. And then the easy part, we'll just go ahead and get rid of this, clean up this mountain range here. No problem at all. Let's go ahead and fix this last little bit. I have no idea what that is there, but it is very distracting. Let's get rid of it. And you know what? While we're at it, let's get rid of this last thing here. Very easy. I'm just going to change my brush hardness, and I'm going to pick maybe an element about here and just split the difference, just like that. And I screwed that up a little bit, so let's fix it again. Just around the edge of that rock, just like that. Perfect. We'll zoom that out a little bit. And that looks good for now. All right, the only other thing that I'd say might be distracting is this dirt pile here. So let's go ahead and see if that becomes distracting. If it becomes distracting later, we'll get rid of it. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave it as is. So here's the thing. What I've already done, and I'm here in Capture One, the next step would be to take all of these files, all of these star files, load all 100 files into a stack in Photoshop, create that tail fade, and then go back into Photoshop with a flattened version of it so that we can bring it in on top of our other layer. Now, since I've already done that, and I've loaded them here, we can actually select the one that we want. So in this case, I'm going to close the full stars. We're going to use this star fade. I'm going to select it here, and I'm just going to bring it in right on top of our other image. So remember in the last scene, we went out of our way to create a perfect mask edge around the church. Well, I'm not going to do it in this scene because I think it can be solved an easier way. Oh, something else too. We just made all of these and turned these stars into lightened. So a popular technique among photographers with star trails, and this does work sometimes, you stack all of your stars, bake that into a flat layer, bring that in to whatever you're trying to composite into, in this case would be this blue sky and this dark blue hour, and then use those stars as a lighten blending mode again over the background image. So let's see what happens if we do that. Let's just go ahead and set this to lighten. This is what happens. So bad star trail photography is going to look like this. Now, why do you think this is happening? Well, it's because the sky behind it is too bright to composite into it. The reason we actually see the stars so vividly here is because the stars are the only thing lighting the sky right now. We have no light on the horizon. We are in a dark sky reserve. So we have to do something a little bit different. We either have to darken this blue so that this blends into it, or we have to find a different way to blend them together. Well, what I want to do is find a new way to blend this together. I just showed you guys last time how to create a channel and create a perfect selection to drop things in, but I think I have a feeling that this will look very unnatural because we still have a little bit of light on the horizon. So what I actually want to do is just blend these together in a simple way. But here's the main issue. The color balance, the white balance on this is completely different for the stars as it is for this other scene. So what I want to do first is bring this a little bit back to the same color temperature. In this case, it's going to be a cooler temperature to match that blue sky. And I'm going to do that by going into Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Let's bring the temperature down a little bit. Let's bring it to like -40. And let's also change the tint a little bit too. By pulling the tint down, what I'm actually doing is changing it to more of a cyan or a green. So I want it to be slightly cyan, and that looks pretty good. So just by changing it here, we've changed it from warm to cold, and I'm going to go ahead and apply that. So now it's a little bit closer. If we turn it off and on, you can see it's a little bit closer to the sky color. I think it'll blend in a little bit better now. All right, now it's time to blend our star trails with our static blue hour shot. So what I'm actually going to do on the star trails layer, this may seem like oversimplifying things, but let's oversimplify it if we can. I'm going to add a mask, and all I'm going to do is draw a gradient from white to black. And we're going to see how this looks from here to here. And actually, let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit. That looks pretty good for a first try. I'm going to set this back to normal here. Let's try it again. But I'm going to reverse it, and I'm going to draw from the top to the bottom. So maybe about here to about here. That's still looking pretty good. I liked what I had before. And what I'm trying to do is create a nice blend here so that we start to lose these and fade them on the horizon, but we still end up in the church. So with a gradient just like this, that actually looks pretty good. Now, check this out in our quick mask mode. Well, we've managed to kind of blend into some of the church and everything. I think we can go even further. I think I can take it from about here to about here. And that's starting to look much more believable. We got some hot lights behind the church. Now that we have this gradient set, all we're going to do is take a look at the quick mask mode here, and we're actually going to go ahead and blend out some more areas. So right now we have most of the sky, most of everything from the blue hour, but what I want to go ahead and do is I want to start adding in the church. So we want to go ahead and blend out most of the church. So I'm going to go ahead and black out some of the church just like this. So we're going to go ahead and fade it into itself. And I'm also going to do a better job of blending in most of the foreground. So we're going to keep most of the foreground without any blend, because remember, that's our crisp foreground. That's exactly what we want in the frame. And if I turn this mask mode off, you can see that I'm starting to fade some of that blue hour back in just by brushing it in. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of establish this soft brush here. And the next thing I'm going to do is zoom in here on the church. And unfortunately, the easiest way to do this is to just go in and start lasso selecting the edge of the church. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to fade inside of the edge here just a little bit, 1 pixel. And again, the way that I like to do this, I like to draw some of the mask. And I'm picking on the inside edge here. I'm going to have a little bit of edge of the other stars. And as soon as the mask starts to get a little out of reach here, I'm just going to go ahead and terminate it. And I'm going to pan, and what I'm going to do is just go ahead and continue it by adding shift. And I'm going to be very careful here. So we're going to draw around here, linear shape around this. And we can always zoom in while we're masking. And I'm going to draw a fairly detailed mask around this. Last time we lucked out because we could do this pretty much with a channel selection, which was a really great way to be able to do it. Well, let's just go ahead and add more here. Let's go ahead and add more on the top. Keep it consistent. I'll add more here. Again, keeping it consistent. Inside of the edge. We'll go around this object here. Continue to mask. That's an interesting thing too that I want to kind of remind you guys about. We have done everything we've could so far in this entire tutorial series. I've shown you guys ways to do masking with gradients, with paintbrushes, with luminosity masks, with pretty much every tool we have at our disposal inside of Photoshop. But sometimes it comes down to just literally cutting things out piece by piece, and you can't avoid it. The trick is to employ all the tools and techniques you have at your disposal to prevent that from happening. And that's what I like to do. So when I can get everything solved with a simple painted mask, I do it. But when it comes down to it, if I need to do a little bit more work, I'm all about doing more work, whatever creates the best looking image. So don't be afraid to do this extra masking. It's well worth the effort, because you're going to end up with a really nice image overall. And right now we have the stars. We can use some of the darker mountains, but we really want this church to be front and center. If we print this image really large, it's going to look great if we're using the F8. or F9 exposure in the foreground. So let's go ahead and do that a little bit. We'll end this here, very easy with the stylus. We'll end this here, very, very easy with the stylus. Do the same thing here. And I'll continue the mask into the ground. Probably zoom out a little bit more. Freehand this one all the way down here, all the way down into the ground, and just go ahead and make sure that we complete it, just like that. And I'll go ahead and black this part out as well, and you can see that we'll end up with a church in the foreground. Zoom in a little bit. We're going to have a slight edge, which is fine. I've anticipated that. Even though we've painted, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and take this mask, and I'm going to go ahead and feather it by about ½ a pixel. And that looks pretty good. Now at this point, it will take a little bit more time to go on and clean up some of the edges of the mask, but that's something that we can do at a later time. For now, I want to move on to the next phases of the blending. So we go ahead and name this. We have our stars on top, and this is our object cleanup. So OBJ clean. This is our corrected raw. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I'm just going to zoom out for myself so I can see the whole thing here. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and save this in the background. So what we're going to do is take everything and go ahead and put it in a folder just in case we need to access things later. We'll call it blend, and I'll go ahead and make a new layer out of everything selected. And let's go ahead and add a little bit more kick really quick. My favorite star combination of Color Efex Pro, just from contrast and some extra color. All right, that's probably too much in Pro Contrast, just like the last time. You can see that this is going to warm it up, so I'll probably go around 60 here, and we'll do something light, maybe 15 here and 15 here, toggle it, and it's going to add the punch back to the image. Let's use the polarization just to strengthen some of the tones in the sky, which will be about 120%. It's close enough at 119, and I'll say OK to apply it. That looks pretty good. We'll just go ahead and shorten that name to CEP contrast / Pola, just so we remember later when we go back into this file. This file underneath is just a duplicate of the blend, so we can go ahead and get rid of that for now. The first thing I want to do is I want to bring up the intensity of the stars and the intensity of the highlights in the image. You can see I have a lot of shadows, very few midtones, and very few highlights. This is basically all the highlights in my image. So what I'm going to do with this layer enabled, we're going to go in and we're going to select the RGB, so the total luminosity of the image, and I'm going to create a curves layer. So we'll go all the way up here to curves. And what I'm going to do now, and you can see what we have intact, so we're not affecting the shadows, just the highlights here, which are a little bit dull in my opinion. What we're actually going to do is just go ahead and we're going to boost, this is called a gamma boost, we're actually going to boost all of the highlights in the scene, just to make it a little bit more vibrant. So we're going to give this nice, perfect, arched curve to it. Well, the next thing I'm going to do actually is do the reverse of that. So what I want to do is darken the top of the sky. So I like the lightness on the bottom of the sky here, and what I want to do is darken the top of the sky and remove a little bit of the blue saturation. So I'm going to do that by selecting the highlights, Command-Shift-I to inverse that selection. I'm going to create an additional curves layer, and that's going to be the inverse of the curves. And what I'm actually going to do is pull that down a little bit. So what this is actually going to do is it's going to keep those stars really crisp and bright because it's knocking the correction out of them here. But what it's also going to do is it's going to add contrast to the sky. In a similar fashion, if I wanted to remove some of the blue in the top of the sky, if I pull this over, you can see it's going to mitigate it by adding a little bit of green. So just a hair there, not much, just to pull some of that saturation out. And you can see that it's affecting now the whole image. So what I'm going to do here, I just want it in the top of the sky. I'm going to select the gradient tool, and I'm going to make sure that it's set to multiply, and what I'm actually going to do is fade this mask out so it's just basically darkening the top of the sky down, and that's just going to knock everything out for me, and then I get that nice gradation on the top. And at this point, here's where I can make my adjustments and really make that a little bit more dramatic. So that's a pretty cool way to just drop those shadows out. And I'll go ahead and save this in the background. We'll move on to the next step. These two filters here, you can see that we have done something selectively with the luminosity, more selectively to the luminosity, but I still feel like if I look at this here, if I look at the histogram, I still feel like we can brighten everything up. I feel this is a little bit dull. So I'm going to add a global curves, one more global curves, and what I'm actually able to do is just pull these highlights up a little bit, everything, and that's basically bringing the entire luminosity of the image up just a little bit. And what I can do just to be careful, I can sort of lock down some of the shadows, but what this does is it pulls everything up. So this isn't a gamma boost anymore, this is actually a clamp on the levels. So it's going to pull these into full white, it's going to bring all those highlights up. So let's just name these real quick so they don't get confusing. If I double click it, we'll call this global curves, shadows, and highlights. Great. So what I want to do now is turn these off, leave it by default. I'm going to go into the curves, and since I've already created this highlights mask here, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate that and invert it. So I have highlights and shadows. Select all, and I'm going to subtract them both. And you guessed it, I'm going to create a midtones correction. So we'll put this on top here, another curves layer, and this is going to be for the midtones. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to add a lot of contrast here because I like that. I'm just going to boost it a little bit in the shadows, and then what I'm going to do is ramp it up here in the highlights. And you can see what's cool about that is we've taken care of the luminosity of these elements, these star trails, but where I feel we're missing is right here around the midtones, these lighter tones. So if I start to ramp this up here, you can see that that is just affecting the midtones. That's too much. But if I just do this a little bit, you can see now I'm pulling up those midtones in the horizon, and I'm basically justifying the ability to do this in a simple mask just by being able to add the luminosity back to the star layers that are blending in with our original scene. Another thing that I want to go ahead and do is start about sharpening this thing. Let's go ahead and sharpen this image. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it. Again, filter, other, high pass. We'll set it to 3 here. Set it to overlay, and since we already have selected just the church, and you can see this mask right here, what I'm going to do is select this mask, and I'm going to invert it with Command-Shift-I. I'm going to go back up to our new high pass filter here, and I'll call this high pass. And that looks pretty good. And with a high pass filter, you can see that now I get some of that sharpening. If I zoom in, look, check out around those window frames there, I have a really nice and sharp image. Now here's the cool thing. The last one we had to talk about aggressive noise reduction. Now with noise reduction in the Milky Way comes into play because we're shooting a static scene. But when we stack stars using the blending mode Lighten, when we use Lighten, we put them all together, you basically see the stars only. Only the stars are bright enough to invoke the Lighten command of 50% gray and above. But if we zoom in, we will not have that much noise because the noise pattern is not bright enough to register on it. So I never soften my star trails because I don't have to. And that's a very powerful thing to know because it means you don't have to do any additional softening or any tricks to get that to look really good. It's going to be pretty much, and you can zoom in a little bit, pretty much noise free, which is a very, very nice thing. One final thing I want to do here is I really like what we have going on here. We have some nice luminosity, almost like this church is emitting some light. Fades down here and fades down here. I want to accentuate that using one more technique, and that's going to be dodge and burn layer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a dodge and burn layer, and I'm going to do that by holding Option and creating the new layer button here, and it's going to ask me what I want to do here. If I tell it to be blending mode overlay, it's going to ask me if I want to fill it with 50% gray. That's fine. We're just going to call that dodge and burn. Now if you guys remember with the dodge and burn layers, this is getting back to basics of Photoshop. But basically if I paint white on this layer, just like a high pass filter works, then it's going to add luminosity to the layer. If I paint black, it's going to darken it. So basically what I want to do here with a brush, and I'm going to go into full screen mode here so that I can pan around and we can zoom in on this area that I really want to talk about. What I want to do is add some more luminosity in these highlights here in the grass, and I want to pull them away so it looks like the eye is going to be kind of drawn towards the church. So we'll start with white, and I'm going to use a flow really low. actually, like 5% or something like that, so that I can go very, very light on these brush strokes here and just kind of add little bits of luminosity, just a little tiny bit around the church. So I'm basically illuminating these highlights a little bit more, making them a little bit more predominant here, basically just drawing around it to create this shape. Don't want anything on the church itself, but I'll just go ahead and spread these out a little bit more down towards the front of the camera and down here. Same thing I'm going to do with the dark. What I'm going to do is start pulling some dark in to the frame and just kind of create a little bit more character here. A little bit more dark, dramatic character. And then here too, I can also paint it from down here, so it starts to kind of engulf some of this grass. And if I zoom out here, again, we'll zoom all the way out and you can see that we have just sort of a lighten effect here. And the more I start to add this, the more I can accentuate this little highlight effect. Too much and it'll look like it's being illuminated from somewhere, just enough and it'll create this little island effect for the church. And you can see that before and after. So it's subtle, but I think it works really good in this case. So let's take a look at where we came from to where we ended up. If we just do an easy before and after here, you can see the original raw looks interesting. Blue sky, not that great, but blue sky for star trails is awesome. So we're able to take this blue sky image, shoot the stars, and take it from this all the way to this, creating something that's very unique. And now remember from the intro to stars section, we talked about how the direction of the stars, if we're shooting north and south or towards the poles, we get a rotation around the stars, so that's how you get that spin around the circle of the stars. But if you're actually at the meridian or the equator, if you're looking at it halfway between, you're actually getting where the two rotational points meet. And that's what we're actually having here. It's actually dead center. You can see where they become a straight line. So it's actually a really beautiful place to shoot star trails because you get different converging lines. So it creates this really beautiful and unique compositions. And I think this is pretty good. And you can also see that just adding the stars, if we go back down to, if we turn all of these layers off, if we just go from here to here, adding the stars was actually much easier just with a gradient and a simple mask. We were able to take advantage of the benefits of using a gradient, a simple mask, a basic painted mask, and then through some color corrections using certain points of luminosity, we were able to pull all that back together and create an awesome final image. That wraps it up for the lesson on star trails. If you guys check the companion files, it was impossible to include 100 raw files because that would be a ridiculous amount of data to download. But what I did include is I included the collapse, the single frame tips of both the stars as tails and the stars as just straight lines too without any fade at all. So when you're building this lesson, feel free to experiment and see what you like the most, because that's a good way for you to see how you want to shoot in the field, what kind of vision you have for your shot. So I've left you guys all of those, and obviously all of these PSDs are intact, so you can always reference back to the original file and see what I did. Not only does that wrap up our section on astrophotography, it actually wraps things up in the studio here. We've spent a lot of time working on these files together on this one. We've had a ton of lessons. We started in Italy, in the beautiful Ligurian coast, and then we went to Rome. We've been to Cambodia, we've been to Hong Kong, Singapore, and then finally New Zealand to do these stars. I've built this in a way where it's become progressively more difficult over time, and we've also transcended different genres of architectural photography as we've done that. So different types of architecture, different types of cityscape, from old to new, from light to dark, and everything in between. We've learned how to blend time together, and finally we've learned how to create really beautiful and memorable shots of the night sky. But don't let this be the end of it. Remember that all of these techniques that I've shown you, try to apply them in your work that you're getting from now on. All of these techniques can be used pretty much in any genre of photography since they're basic editing techniques. And also I started simple, I started with basic masking, and then I put a little bit of an emphasis on some of the luminosity masks, but I hope that I was able to simplify it in a way that you understand it now. Just be cautioned that a lot of people will say that luminosity masking is the way to edit photos, but I hope what you've seen from my workflow is while luminosity masking is a very useful technique and a tool, it only needs to be applied when necessary and very conservatively. Sometimes you may need one or two luminosity mask, but by no means do you need it as an entire technique. Just keep in mind that all these tools and techniques that I've shown you are just simple ways to make your photographs out of this world. So the bottom line is, with post-processing, try to keep it simple and try to keep it really powerful, and above all, try to make your work as beautiful as possible.
It's amazing to think that after being on the road for 3.5 months filming, that this project is already done and everything's completed. We've gone all over the world together. In the first tutorial, we just touched on landscape photography and the basics of post-processing, but in this tutorial, I was able to get extremely advanced, and we were also able to go to all these amazing locations from Singapore, Hong Kong, Italy, and here in New Zealand to shoot the stars. It's been an amazing experience, and I hope you guys got so much out of it. With this tutorial, I've literally tried to share everything I know about photography with you guys, and we've been able to go to some of my favorite locations in the world. If you've followed along in this entire tutorial, worked through all the files, done all the post-processing, you are now ready to travel anywhere on this planet and create world-class photography. When I first picked up a camera so many years ago, the thought of traveling full-time and being a professional photographer seemed like it was a distant dream. But when my wife and I decided to become completely location independent and we sold everything and we started traveling the world full-time for photography, I knew that that dream was within my grasp. And with a lot of work, a lot of passion, and dedication to the business side of things, building my portfolio and making the contacts that I have today, I'm really thankful to say that I've made that dream a reality. When I really started getting serious about my photography business, it was really important to me to have quality over quantity. And now that you guys have all the tools at your disposal, you're going to be able to do quality images too. So I encourage you guys, don't just release images that you think are mediocre, or images that you are not proud of. Only release the images that you are most proud of, because those are the ones that people are going to remember you for. Don't just release any image just for some likes on Facebook. Don't just make the sky all red. Don't play to what you think people like. Play to what you like. Play to what makes you happy, and produce the images that you want to produce. To be completely honest, I have some images that I've been trying to get for 4 years in different parts of the world, and I still haven't gotten them right. And that is a little sad, because I really want to share these images, but it also gives me something to work for. So if you don't get the images that you like, just think about being able to visit that place again. So use it as motivation to always try again and always get something better the next time. Photography is always going to be incredibly competitive, and with all the knowledge that you've just gained, there is no reason why you should take a mediocre picture anymore. So if the sky's not right, if you didn't get the conditions you wanted, then go back again until you get the perfect image. And I can't wait to see the images that you guys produce with the tools you've learned from this tutorial. I'm really big and really responsive on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on 500px, so please feel free to message me anytime on that. When you've purchased this, you've also got an email that's going to give you a link to an exclusive Facebook group where you can talk about the images and ask me questions anytime you want, and I encourage you guys to do so. And if becoming a professional photographer is your dream, my advice to you is to never give up. Follow your dreams. If someone like me can do it, you can definitely do it too.